Britain sent its criminals to the other side of the world to disappear. That was the plan. Pack them onto wooden ships, chain them below deck, push them across a violent ocean, leave them under a burning southern sky, so far from home that even their names would begin to fade. But history has a strange way of turning punishment into prophecy, because the people Britain tried to throw away did not simply vanish. They survived, and in surviving, they helped shape one of the most unusual cultures on earth, a country that speaks English but does not sound fully British, a country that inherited British law but learned to laugh at authority, a country that came from empire, punishment, hunger, violence, shame, and exile, yet grew into a place known for mateship, dry humor, toughness, informality, and the mysterious habit of saying no worries when everything might actually be falling apart. So here is the question: how did a prison colony become Australia? And why did it become so different from the country that created it? To answer that, we have to go back to Britain in the 1700s, where the streets were crowded, the prisons were overflowing, and the law could be terrifying. This was not the polite Britain of royal portraits and grand houses. This was a Britain of dirty alleys, hungry children, desperate workers, and courts that could destroy a life in minutes. A person could steal cloth, food, tools, or a small amount of money, and suddenly their future was gone. Many convicts were not master criminals. Many were poor. Some were teenagers. Some stole because they were starving. Some were Irish rebels. Some were people born on the wrong side of a cruel system. Britain had a problem it did not want to face. Poverty was growing. Crime was rising. Prisons were packed. For years, Britain had sent convicts to America. But after the American Revolution, that door closed. So Britain looked across the world and found a new place for its unwanted people, a distant land that British leaders imagined as empty, useful and silent. Australia. But Australia was not empty. Long before the British arrived. Aboriginal peoples had lived across that continent for tens of thousands of years. They had nations, languages, law, stories, sacred places, trade routes, knowledge of the land, and deep spiritual connections to country. So, the first hidden truth is this. Australia was not born in an empty wilderness. It was born in collision. When the first fleet arrived in 1788, 11 ships came carrying convicts, Marines, sailors, officers, and officials. They had crossed oceans for months. Many were sick. Many were frightened. Some had no idea what waited for them. Imagine the moment. The ships move through strange blue water. The air smells different. The trees do not look like English trees. The birds do not sound like English birds. The sun feels sharper, almost judgmental. And on the shore, there are people watching, not ghosts, not background figures. The owners of the land. For the British, this was the beginning of a colony. For Aboriginal people, it was the beginning of invasion. That tension sits under the whole story like a buried fire, because while convicts were suffering under British punishment, Aboriginal communities were facing something even greater: land theft, disease, violence, hunger, and the breaking of worlds. This is why the story of Australian culture is not simple. It is not just a story of brave convicts becoming free people. It is also a story of empire, a story of people punished by Britain, while also becoming part of a colony that punished others. And that contradiction is one reason Australia's identity still feels haunted. The colony itself was harsh from the beginning. The British imagined order, but what they found was chaos. The soil around Sydney was difficult for European farming. Food supplies ran low. The climate confused them. The bush seemed endless. The distance from Britain was almost impossible to understand. In London, authority felt close. In Australia, Britain was a memory beyond the sea. Orders came slowly. Help came slowly. News came slowly. And in that silence, something began to change. The old British world was built on class. There were gentlemen and servants, masters and laborers, people who gave orders, and people who bowed their heads. Your accent mattered. Your family mattered. Your clothing mattered. Your manners mattered. But in early Australia, many of those old rules began to weaken. A gentleman could still be a gentleman. Of course, a governor could still punish. A soldier could still hold a weapon, but the land did not care about titles. The heat did not respect rank. Hunger did not bow to a noble name. If a convict knew how to build, farm, cook, fix, carry, hunt, nurse, or survive, that skill could matter more than polished speech. This was one of the first cracks in Britain's mirror. Australia was supposed to copy Britain. Instead, it began to test Britain, and the test was brutal. Convicts worked under strict control. They cleared land, built roads, cut timber, hauled stone, raised buildings, and formed the physical bones of the colony. Punishment was never far away. A wrong move could mean lashes. A failed escape could mean chains. A serious offense could mean being sent somewhere even worse. So imagine the mind of a convict. He has already been judged. He has already been exiled. He may never see his mother again. He may never see his home again. The government is not a protector to him. The law is not. Sacred. Authority is the thing that dragged him across the world. And when enough people share that feeling, it becomes more than resentment. It becomes culture. This is where Australia's anti-authority streak begins to make sense. It did not appear from nowhere. It came from people who had seen power up close and did not trust it. A guard was not automatically respected. A governor was not automatically admired. A polished man with a grand voice could still be a fool. And in a place where many people had been crushed by the system, anyone who acted superior could become a target. This is the root of one of Australia's most famous instincts, cutting down the tall poppy. If someone stands too proudly, talks too grandly, or acts too important, people bring them back to earth. Not always gently. Sometimes with a joke. Sometimes with silence. Sometimes with a nickname so sharp it follows them for life. In Britain, class could lift a person above others. In Australia, acting above others could make people suspicious. That is a major difference, and it came from pain. But pain alone does not build a nation. People also needed each other. In a world of punishment, hunger, strange land, and distance, the person beside you could become your lifeline. A mate might share food. Mate might warn you when a guard was coming. Mate might help you finish work before punishment fell. A mate might keep your secret. A mate might stand by you when the world treated you like dirt. This is where mateship begins to rise, not as a slogan, not as a tourist word. As a survival code. Mateship meant you do not leave someone behind when hardship comes. It meant loyalty without too many soft words. It meant helping without making a performance of kindness. It meant laughing with someone so they did not break. And because many early convicts already distrusted authority, loyalty to your mate could feel more sacred than loyalty to the system. That is powerful. And dangerous. Because every culture has a shadow, mateship could be generous, brave, and deeply human, but it could also exclude. For a long time, the national story of mateship often centered white men, bushworkers, soldiers, miners, and settlers. Women were pushed to the edge of the NCG unsettlers. Myth. Aboriginal people were pushed even further. Migrants were sometimes mocked before they were accepted. So the second hidden truth is this. The same culture that celebrated fairness did not always practice it. The same country that loved the idea of a fair go often denied it to many people. That contradiction did not disappear. It became part of Australia's unfinished story. But still, the myth had power. Because on a hard continent, the idea of standing together felt almost holy. You can hear it in the bush stories. The lonely worker on a remote track, the miner covered in dust, the family fighting drought, the pub full of people who speak roughly. But notice when someone is missing. The humor is dry. The emotions are hidden. The care is real. Australian culture learned not to say too much. That is another difference from Britain. But it also came partly from Britain. The British had the stiff upper lip. Australia turned it into something rougher. Less formal. More sunburnt. Instead of dramatic speeches, people said, "She be right." Instead of emotional confession, someone might hand you a beer, fix your fence, or insult you just enough to show they liked you. That sounds strange to outsiders, but it carries a deep meaning. In a harsh place, humor became armor. If you could joke while hungry, you were still alive. If you could mock the boss, he had not fully conquered you. If you could laugh at yourself, shame lost some of its power. This is why Australian humor often feels blunt, sarcastic, and self-mocking. It is not just comedy. It is old survival magic. The kind of magic people use when they have no control over the world, but still control their tone. Then the land itself did something Britain could not predict. It changed people. Britain was shaped by villages, old churches, estates, factories, fog, and cities. Australia's settler culture was shaped by heat, distance, drought, flood, bushfire, strange animals, dangerous work, and long roads where help could be far away. The bush became more than a place. It became a test, a spiritual trial. Even many Australians who lived in cities came to imagine the bush as the hidden heart of the nation. Out there, fine manners mattered less than endurance. A clean accent mattered less than knowing what to do when a horse fell, a wheel broke, a child got sick, or the weather turned cruel. Australia became practical, suspicious of fancy language. more impressed by usefulness than elegance. This does not mean Australia had no class system. It still does. Wealth still mattered. Power still mattered. But the cultural ideal was different. A person was supposed to seem ordinary, approachable. Not too proud. Not too delicate. Not too impressed with themselves. That is one of the sharpest breaks from Britain. In Britain, old status could be displayed like a coat of arms. In Australia, status often had to hide under a plain shirt. Then came gold. And the story changed again. In the 1850s, gold discoveries pulled people from across the world into Australia. Suddenly, this was not only a place of punishment. It was a place of possibility. Men rushed to the gold fields hoping to become rich overnight. Chinese migrants arrived. Americans came. Europeans came. Irish came. People came with dreams, debts, hunger, and secrets. The gold fields were rough, loud, dangerous, and full of hope. A man could arrive poor and leave rich, or arrive hopeful and die forgotten. But gold did something deeper than fill pockets. It weakened the old idea that birth decided destiny. On the gold fields, luck could laugh at class. A poor man could strike gold. A gentleman could fail. Miner covered in mud could have more power than an official in a clean coat. And when authorities demanded licenses and tried to control miners too tightly, resentment exploded. The spirit of rebellion sharpened. The old convict suspicion of authority found new life. Among free people, Australia was no longer just a prison colony. It was becoming a society where ordinary people expected to be heard. That expectation helped feed the idea of the fair go. The belief that a person deserves a chance, not because they are noble, not because they speak beautifully, but because they are human. Again, the truth is complicated. Australia did not always give everyone a fair go, but the idea became powerful. Almost sacred. A national promise the country has often failed, but keeps returning to. And then there is the language. Language is where culture leaves fingerprints. Australian English came from many voices mixing together. British regional accents. Irish. Speech. Working class. Slang. Convict words. Aboriginal words. Later migrant influences. Over time, it stopped sounding exactly like Britain. It became flatter, warmer, quicker, more relaxed. Words shortened. Afternoon became arvo. Barbecue became Barbie. Football became foodie. Sunglasses became sunny. Ease. Australia became a place where language itself refused to stand too straight. Even speech became informal. Friendly. Mocking. Practical. As if the words had taken off their jackets and rolled up their sleeves. Aboriginal words entered the language too. Kangaroo. Boomerang. Wallaby. Cooee. These words remind us that Australian identity was never purely British, no matter how much the empire wanted it to be. The land had older names, older voices, older laws. Some were ignored. Some were stolen. Some survived, and they still echo. That is why the story has a spiritual tension, because under modern Australia, with its beaches, cities, cricket grounds, suburbs, and coffee shops, there is another Australia. Older. Wounded. Sacred. Continent of songlines and memory. A place where British convicts suffered under empire while indigenous people suffered from empire. Both truths exist. Neither cancels the other. Together, they make the story deeper, stranger, and more unsettling. Now comes one of the greatest twists. For a long time, convict ancestry was a shame. Families hid it. People changed stories. Some pretended their ancestors had arrived as free settlers. To have a convict in the family was seen as dirty, low, embarrassing. The stain of crime had crossed generations. But as Australia grew more confident, the meaning changed. The shame became a badge. People began to search family records with pride. A convict ancestor was no longer only a disgrace. They became proof of toughness, proof of survival, proof that your family had been there from the beginning, when the colony was raw and dangerous. That is an incredible reversal. Britain sent convicts away as rejected people. Australia later turned many of them into founding figures. The outcast became the ancestor. The criminal became the pioneer. The shame became the origin story. And that is why convict history still has such emotional force. It tells Australians something they like to believe about themselves, that they come from people who endured, people who did not bow too easily, people who could laugh while suffering, people who were not chosen by the powerful, but built something anyway. But we must be careful. Convicts did not create Australian culture alone. That would be too simple. Australia became different from Britain because many forces collided. Convict punishment, Aboriginal resistance, empire, distance, climate, class, tension, Irish influence, bush life, gold, migration, labor, movement, sport, war, urban life, multicultural change. All of it shaped the country. But convict history lit a fuse. It helped create the emotional pattern. Distrust the person who thinks they are above you. Stand by your mate. Do not show pain too easily. Use humor when things get dark. Do not be too impressed by power. Give people a fair go, at least in theory. Keep things practical. Keep things informal. And never forget that the official story is usually hiding something. That is why Australia became so different from Britain. Britain sent people away to preserve order. Australia learned to question order. Britain valued class. Australia developed a myth of equality. Britain honored tradition. Australia admired usefulness. Britain spoke in formality. Australia shortened the words. Britain exported shame. Australia turned shame into identity. There is something almost biblical about it. The rejected stone becomes part of the foundation. The people sent into exile become the beginning of a nation. The punishment becomes a culture. And still, the ghosts remain. The chained convict below deck. The Aboriginal warrior watching from the shore. The governor reading orders from a distant king. The hungry worker laughing beside a fire. The miner raising his voice against authority. The family hiding a convict name. The descendant later searching for that same name with pride. All of them are part of the same story. So when you hear an Australian say, mate, it is not just a casual word. Behind it is hardship, fear, loyalty, work, rebellion, and memory. When you hear, no worries, it is not just relaxed speech. It carries generations of people learning to survive without showing the full weight on their shoulders. When Australians mock arrogance, they are not only being rude, they are repeating an old cultural instinct born in a world where power often meant cruelty. And when Australia feels different from Britain, it is because it was shaped by Britain's shadow, then forced to grow under a different sun. Britain tried to send its problems away, but across the sea, those problems became people. Those people became communities. Those communities became myths, and those myths became a nation. The forbidden truth is not that convicts alone created Australia. And the forbidden truth is more powerful than that. Australia was shaped by the people Britain punished, the land Britain misunderstood, and the indigenous worlds Britain tried to silence. It became different because it was born from exile and collision, from shame and survival. From cruelty and courage. From empire and resistance. From laughter in places where laughter should have been impossible. So maybe Australia's culture is not strange at all. Maybe it makes perfect sense. If you build a society from people who were chained, judged, mocked, and abandoned, do not be surprised when their descendants distrust anyone who acts like a king. Do not be surprised when they value the person standing beside them more than the person standing above them. Do not be surprised when they turn pain into jokes, strangers into mates, and old shame into pride. Britain sent convicts to the edge of the world as punishment. But history was watching, and history whispered back, "You have not ended their story. You have only moved it to a place where it can become something else." That something else became Australia, a country still arguing with its past, still laughing at power, still haunted by what was taken, still proud of what was survived, still different from Britain in ways Britain never planned. And maybe that is the final revelation. Australia was not simply copied from Britain. It was forged under punishment, under sun, under violence. Under silence, under laughter, and under the strange, stubborn belief that even the discarded can become dangerous, unforgettable, and free. If this story made you see Australia differently, hit the like button, subscribe for more hidden history, and tell me in the comments, do you think Australia's rebellious spirit came mostly from the convicts, from the land itself, or from something even deeper?